Last summer, I was at the Seattle ferry dock in the early evening, and I took this photo. I always saw this image in my mind as an almost flat, high contrast graphic representation of what was in front of me. So this is my first attempt to recreate this image in my art journal using gouache paint over black India ink. So the first thing I did was take my watercolor brush and paint 2 coats of India ink onto my journal. And this is pretty nice heavy watercolor paper. And then I divided my page into thirds and drew a pretty good approximation of the shapes with my white pastel pencil. And the pastel pencil is nice to start out with because anything you don't like, you just rub off with your finger. It's very light and it just disappears once you start painting. So I thought I'd just block in the sky, and look how nice the gouache covers. It's great because it's nice and opaque, so it covers over the black, but a little bit of the black shows through, so there's some continuity in the piece. It's not going to cover completely, so that you have these interesting shapes, but you also have the background underpainting showing through a little bit, which I think is nice. I like to use a flat brush for this part because you get nice, pretty straight lines, and it's great for the water because you can do that, do the little ripples in the water with your brush turned on the side and get some of that lighting in there. I'm just blocking it in real quickly right now. Another thing I like about this particular picture is that there are a combination of warm whites and cool whites. So, and they're blended, they're nicely blended. So I'm using a combination of a little bit of yellow ochre mixed in with the white, and also kind of cerulean blue mixed in with the white, and then blending those eventually together so that there's that kind of warm sunlight shining on the water, the blue of the water, and also coming out in the blue of the sky here eventually. I love painting on black because you can just kind of almost sculpt these images out of the black background. And there's such interesting shapes in this picture. Things that I might not come up with directly out of my mind. But the other thing that's cool is that if you look at this picture, there's all these interesting shapes, and it needs to sort of have that feel of the dock, but all the shapes don't have to be absolutely perfect. Unless maybe you're a dock worker and you understand what all these different things do. I don't think you're going to look at this and really notice that anything's not exactly as it was in the photograph, which is fine with me because what I want is for these interesting shapes to come out, and I want it to be kind of a window of sort of this industrial, sort of these industrial black shapes in silhouette against something from nature that's very beautiful with the water and the sun shining off the water, and then eventually focusing on the ferry crossing. So right now, using a smaller brush to just get some of those little details out of the black. And I'm not going to worry about getting the exact shapes out of the black, because in the end I can always take the black gouache and kind of clean things up. So I'm leaving things that I like and trying to make sure that they're there, but I'm not worried about them being perfect quite yet. Another thing about this painting that I want to talk about is that if you wanted to get all these lines perfectly straight, you could use a straight edge. I chose purposefully not to do that because as much as I want the lines to be somewhat straight, I also don't want them to be absolutely perfect. I don't want this to look like it came out of my computer. I want it to look like it was painted by hand, and that there's a little bit of a human touch to it. As you can see with the gouache, it covers nicely on the first coat, but sometimes with the lighter colors, it takes a couple coats to really get that brightness to shine through. So sometimes takes a couple coats of the white or the cream color. Now right here, these are hills in the background, and they're kind of a smoky gray. And I wanted to lighten them up a bit. So it's okay after that first layer is dried to I put over that cream color and then dabbed it off a little bit with the paper towel. And that lets some more of the gray show through, because I didn't want the lighter color to completely overpower, and I like the gray showing through that thinner layer up above rather than having it be one mixed color from the palette. And these are just personal decisions you can make as you're painting. So now I have my small brush and a small round brush, and I am just touching up some of those black details that I talked about. The black gouache paint is so nice, it just covers really well. And especially over that black India ink, you get a really nice dark black, and it's nice and flat, which is exactly what I wanted with this piece. I want to emphasize these dark geometric shapes as a window into what's going on behind. And if you'll notice, some of these shapes are not perfectly straight, vertical, or horizontal. There are some things that are a little bit diagonal. There's cables everywhere. There's lots of little things going on in there, and I think that's what gives this its personality. So I'm going to go ahead and include those things. Not everything, but many of those little details that I think gives this its character. If I go to reproduce this painting later on, outside of my journal and on a large piece of watercolor or multimedia paper or watercolor illustration board, I'm going to really use this sketch that I'm doing here in my art journal to guide me, more so than I would the photograph, because I think a lot of the personality and what was in my imagination about this scene when I first saw it is recorded better here in my art journal than it was in the photograph. The photograph is a great reference tool in case you want to add a few details that weren't in your memory, but I really like to have sketches like this, color sketches that I can work from and I can add to, because this is where the actual artistry comes from. In this sketch, you're really getting more of what I saw when I was there than you get from the photograph. Now I love all these little lines, and I guess they're bars up there on the top that go across. They're like safety bars in case someone walks up there. I'm not sure, but I love all those shapes, and that there's just a variety of rectangular shapes and triangles, and they really help to frame the whole painting. Just touching up the black here, because once I put on the black gouache, you can really see where, I don't know if you can see in this video, but I can really see where the India ink looks not quite as dark and a little thinner. And you can use that to your advantage if you're working with something where you like to have a combination of the blacks, the really dark black, and a little bit of a lighter, thinner black. But here, in my mind, I wanted this painting to have all the blacks very, very dark and graphic. So I'm going to take a little time and paint over all that so that it's really nice and flat and dark. And that's going to help emphasize all those lighter colors. And here's that picture again, just using as a reference for some of these bars and lines on the top. just to get a little extra detail in there. I'm saving for last that little sign with the number on it and the little red light at the top, and also the fairy. Those are details that I think really give this painting a lot of character and make it a little more real. And also, especially the little light involves a color that's seen nowhere else in the painting, and so that makes it important. It's a little red light, and although I don't repeat red anywhere else in this painting, I think it's okay to put that little red light in there and have it be kind of a little bit of a focal point. It also does repeat that color a little bit in these little sort of window areas down in the bottom right here, which is kind of a reddish orange, very translucent color over that black. So now I realized I wanted that sign to be a little larger, and the only thing on that sign is the number 3. And I thought about it for a while, because it doesn't really matter if it has the exact same number on there that's in reality at the Seattle Ferry Dock. But I like the number 3 there, and I think, not sure what it signifies, but for some reason it just seems to fit. So I'm going to go ahead and put that 3 on there in a little bit. Now just starting to block in my fairy. And I see from the photo there's this line there, and at first I thought it was kind of a shadow from the fairy. And now I realize it's actually like a wire or something like that. And I'm not loving that. So in a little while after it dries, I'm going to paint that out again. What I do like though is this mesh pattern on the left. And so I'm going to put that pattern in. And then because I love the glare of the sunlight coming through those little window shapes and sort of obstructing that grid pattern a little bit. I don't want it to be perfect. So once that dries, I'm going to put a little bit more of that creamy white color over the top and have it look a little more like a sun glare. So you have to think when you're working in gouache, you really do have to think in layers. And how are you going to get this to look like what you want? Often it takes a few thin layers to get the look you want. It doesn't always come out right the very first time, and it's okay to make mistakes with gouache. You can go in and you can fix those things after that layer dries, and it might take you 2-3 layers to fix it, to make it look different the way you wanted it to look. But don't worry about that. Gouache is very forgiving, and as long as it doesn't get too thick, it's very simple and easy to work with. So as you see, I kind of blurred out some of those diagonal lines of the mesh, and a little bit of the mesh kind of came up into my white paint. Now I'm not going to worry about that because it's gouache, it's going to dry, and I'm going to be able to touch that up a little bit. What I wanted was for those lines to be softened, and they are. Also putting a little bit of red and a little bit of white, and I will put a little orange highlight on that little red light at the top. So I painted out some of that line that was bothering me across the water, but I've kept a little bit of it because I do kind of like it as it's a little bit of a line drawing your eye to the fairy, even if it wasn't a little kind of a shadow or reflection in the water. We're just going to pretend that it is. That's okay. It's my painting, and I can do what I want. So just touching up some of the mesh and the grid work over there. And I'm going to do a darker neutral there to paint that 3. For that sign, I just want you to know that I did not use a black and white to make that gray. I used a blue, kind of a cerulean blue, along with some burnt sienna and a little bit of violet mixed in because I wanted it to have some color in it. I don't want it to be a neutral gray. My only neutral, total neutral in this painting is the black, which I wanted to be a true black. Everything else has some color in it. The white has some yellow ochre, and it has some cerulean, and even the red has some other colors mixed in there, and nothing's straight out of the tube except for the black. I'm just doing some finishing touches here with some more little lines that I see from the photograph, and I'm done. And here's my first attempt at the painting of my day there at the Seattle Ferry Dock. I hope you enjoyed this movie, and I hope you give it a try with your gouache over black. And please join me again on Art on the Brain. If you're interested in me, my art, or my children's books, please check out my webpage or my Facebook page, or find me on Instagram.